Right. So you might think that this is the correct way of balancing question number 21. And you'll notice on the bottom, we have the balanced equation, which says 1 mole of aluminum sulfate reacts with 3 moles of calcium hydroxide, and this produces 2 moles of aluminum hydroxide and 3 moles of calcium sulfate. That equation is balanced. We proved that when we balanced it. But I'm here to tell you today that that's not the most efficient way of balancing this. In your textbook, you learned something called, so this one you write in your notebook, please. This is called counting polyatomic ions as units or groups. Once you learn this technique of balancing, you're going to be able to balance many of these double displacement and single displacement reactions very quickly. Remember how long that took the other day? We were counting up to number 18. Look at that. We're counting up to 18 oxygens. Today you're going to learn that you can apply this technique called counting polyatomic ions in groups. So we already have the formulas on the board. All right? But let me just point something out to you. I hope you can notice that sulfate is a polyatomic ion. Please put a circle around it. And I'm going to put a circle around sulfate on this side also, because we're going to count that as a group. Sulfate group. And here's the other confusing thing. You see hydroxide is this group right here? Hydroxide can be counted as a group. And so now we're going to learn how to count in groups. So take a look. You'll notice on the reactant side, there are 2 aluminum right here. On the product side, there's 1 aluminum. I hope you can see that. Now is the new skill. How many sulfate groups are on the reactant side? There are 3. 3 of whatever is in the parenthesis. 3 groups. So therefore, sulfate, there are 3 groups. How about on this side? There is only 1 group. This one right there. We're counting polyatomic ions in groups. Next, how many calcium on the reactant side? 1. How many calcium on the product side? 1. And finally, how many hydroxide groups? There are 2 hydroxide groups. After all, that's what that means. When you put the hydroxide in parentheses and then put a 2, that means there are 2 hydroxide groups involved. Why? Because the calcium is positive 2, and each of the hydroxides is negative 1. How about over here on the product side? There are 3 hydroxide groups. Why are there 3 hydroxide groups? Because it has chemically combined with aluminum, and aluminum has a charge of positive 3. This is called counting polyatomic ions as units or groups, right? And so now that we've grouped them and counted them together, we can start wherever we want. We don't have to worry about, remember how I said do oxygen at the end and do hydrogen near the end? We don't have to worry about that. Technically, when you're counting in groups, there's no more oxygen or hydrogen. They're in groups. So why don't we just randomly start with the sulfates? Because after all, you'd see it right away. There's 3 sulfates in the reactant side and only 1 on the product side. And so therefore, let's place a coefficient of 3 next to calcium sulfate. What does that do? It brings the number of sulfate groups up to 3. And so now that's balanced. Sulfate groups are now balanced. But what did that do to the calcium? Now there are 3 calciums. So whenever you cause an imbalance, fix it. Therefore, what needs to go in front of calcium hydroxide? You need to place a 3. By placing a 3 there, the calcium becomes 3 units, and the calcium is balanced. But what does that do to the hydroxides? Look carefully. There's 3 as a coefficient of these hydroxides, but those come in pairs. So therefore, there must be 6 hydroxide units. But you're not going to panic, because how are you going to increase the hydroxides on this side? Well, you can place a 2 in front of aluminum hydroxide, because that will cause the hydroxides to go up to 6. But look what it also fixes accidentally. It fixed the aluminum, and now it's all balanced. If you learn how to balance this by counting in groups, you'll be able to balance this very quickly. And that's the key to this technique.